The year was 1838. Once again, the ruthless British Empire set its sights on another helpless target. This time, it was New Zealand, the jewel of Oceania. It all began with the typical colonial discovery story. First came the missionaries to its shores, then came battles and forced treaties with the military. But what happened next took everyone by surprise. This land proved to be unlike any other colony. The indigenous people fiercely resisted and dealt the British forces heavy defeats. The mighty British Empire was completely stunned. For countless years before this, from the Americas to Siberia, their conquests had been unstoppable. We were always the dominant force. How could we now find ourselves at others' mercy? Yet to everyone's surprise, this conflict would span far beyond a single generation. Fast forward to 2024. Maori MPs tore up treaties while chanting traditional war songs, a struggle that has lasted 3 centuries, colonizers who failed to subjugate the natives and natives who couldn't expel the settlers. Together they forged a unique nation in the Southern Hemisphere. Perhaps the most intriguing nation of all New Zealand has a unique history of resistance to colonization. Back in 1642, Dutch explorer Abel Tasman first encountered New Zealand, only to be fiercely driven away by the local Maori people. Then in 1769, Captain James Cook sailed past these shores, but Britain was too preoccupied with colonizing Australia, so they paid little attention to New Zealand. It wasn't until 1800 that the British finally realized, hey, this place is teeming with fish. This led to a wave of British settlers arriving in New Zealand. Missionaries from different nations soon followed European settlers, brought with them devastating diseases and epidemics, along with a surge in violent crime. This sparked growing resentment among the Maori. Initial tensions led to minor armed skirmishes. This posed a significant challenge for Britain. As Britain struggled with this situation, a new development emerged. France began showing interest in New Zealand. Fearing Maori alignment with France. The British government rushed to improve relations with the Maori. They promised that if the Maori accepted the British Queen as their sovereign, Britain would guarantee their rights to their ancestral lands. The Maori chiefs ultimately signed the British Colonial Treaty, now known as the Treaty of Waitangi. The treaty was deliberately deceptive. The British exploited the Maori's inability to read English. They created 2 different versions of the treaty. The Maori version guaranteed their land ownership, while giving Britain only administrative rights. However, the English version stated something very different. It claimed complete British sovereignty over all New Zealand territories. It also included restrictions on Maori land sales. The land must be offered to the British first, before anyone else. Yet even this privilege wasn't enough for the British. They eventually resorted to coercive land transactions and ultimately began outright land confiscation. The British forcibly seized Maori lands. The Maori finally took a stand against this injustice. They sought to invoke the treaty provisions to take legal action against Britain. Their illiteracy proved to be their downfall. The treaty specified for any legal proceedings. The court proceedings were required to take place in Delhi, India. This left the Maori people utterly baffled. After all, the Maori had no idea where Delhi even was, so the Maori resorted to the most straightforward and forceful solution. They launched an armed uprising. In response to the Maori resistance, Britain responded by intensifying their military crackdown. The conflict raged on until 1843. Throughout the grueling 30-year war, the Maori mastered the use of muskets and cannons and adopted guerrilla warfare tactics. Neither side could claim decisive victory. Never had they encountered such a resilient people. The British had never faced such determined resistance. Eventually, even British troops grew battle-weary, left with no alternative. Both parties finally reached a peace agreement in 1872. Yet the controversies surrounding the Treaty of Waitangi continue to resonate to this day. As we discussed earlier, building a modern nation-state depends greatly on collective memory, and New Zealand presents a unique case where Europeans and Maori share the land, though they shared the same citizenship. When it came to their shared history, all they remembered was how their grandfathers fought each other with knives. This created an unbridgeable divide. Many refused to accept that they shared a nation with people of different ethnicities. This deeply concerned the New Zealand government. How could they address this issue? The government proposed a simple solution: go to war. War would forge them into one nation. It was a time-tested strategy. And so, New Zealand entered the First World War, hoping the military would serve as a melting pot to forge national unity. But what the authorities failed to realise was that New Zealand troops had absolutely no clue why they were fighting. The troops were untrained and unmotivated. Victory was completely out of the question, and under Churchill's so-called brilliant leadership, the 80,000-strong Anzac forces were effectively decimated at Gallipoli, losing half their men. Fast forward to the aftermath of World War II. New Zealand finally admitted they were hopeless at warfare, but business that they could handle leveraging its remote location from the battlefields. New Zealand began exporting canned beef and blankets. These trade ventures propelled New Zealand into becoming a developed nation. This small nation at the world's edge surprisingly became a founding member of the Five Eyes Alliance with the US and UK. You might be wondering what exactly the Five Eyes Alliance is, so let me break it down for you. The Five Eyes Alliance is a partnership between the United States, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, forming a powerful intelligence-sharing network. Its origins date back to the World War II Atlantic Charter. The United States and the United Kingdom conduct global surveillance through their intelligence agencies, while sharing crucial intelligence among all member nations. During the Cold War, the Five Eyes Alliance primarily monitored the Soviet Union. Now, however, their focus has shifted to China. If that was all about New Zealand, it wouldn't be worth mentioning, as it would simply be another American ally following orders, nothing worth discussing further. But there's an interesting reason why we're focusing on New Zealand. Surprisingly enough, despite being a Five Eyes member, New Zealand also supports China's Belt and Road Initiative. The Five Eyes Alliance represents America's closest allies. Yet surprisingly, New Zealand joined China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is quite extraordinary. So what's behind New Zealand's unusual stance? It comes down to two main factors: the economy and national security. Let's start with New Zealand's military situation. New Zealand's military power is virtually non-existent. Meanwhile, New Zealand's agriculture is dominated by livestock farming, thanks to its ideal climate conditions. The farmers have mastered their traditional farming methods. However, despite its agricultural prosperity over the years, the country faces challenges due to its population size and various other factors. The country faced barriers to industrialization. Without the ability to develop a proper industrial base, maintaining national defense becomes virtually impossible. This led New Zealand to rely on the United States for military protection. However, this arrangement has become problematic in recent years. Despite America's controversial international interventions, New Zealand faced serious practical challenges. Blindly aligning with the United States, New Zealand risked severe economic hardship. This compelled New Zealand to explore alternative strategies to boost its economic growth while potentially addressing its security concerns. That would be absolutely ideal. New Zealand made a clever strategic move. It identified a lucrative opportunity. The entertainment industry was their target. Let me first tell you about entertainment is actually deeply rooted in New Zealand's culture. Dating back to colonial times, New Zealanders have always had a strong gaming culture. During the 80s gaming console boom in the West, New Zealand managed to jump on the bandwagon, leading to a boom in local console manufacturing. Several domestic manufacturers in New Zealand, they gained essential knowledge in video game development and publishing. Enter the new millennium. The iconic film The Lord of the Rings gave a massive boost to New Zealand's digital industry. Thanks to New Zealand's stunning landscapes, the Lord of the Rings production team was drawn to the country to shoot the epic trilogy. As the film series became a global phenomenon, it nurtured a generation of local VFX talent riding on the trilogy's success. Hollywood studios flocked to New Zealand for filming, significantly boosting the local film industry, leading to the growth of visual effects teams. The expertise and technology gained could be directly applied to game development. Statistics show that the Lord of the Rings trilogy and its franchises generates billions in annual revenue for the country. This opened the government's eyes to the enormous potential of the entertainment industry. It was then that they decided to heavily invest in the sector. Once a media property becomes successful, it can generate significant intellectual property value. Once we can develop merchandise lines, we can turn minimal investment into maximum profit and generate substantial revenue. It was a great concept in theory, but the execution proved challenging. In its early stages, New Zealand successfully established a sizable gaming sector alongside animation and film industries. Building on this momentum, the government started offering professionals in these sectors a more favourable business climate and favourable tax policies, even offering cash incentives. But as time went on, things started to feel off as the country grew. It increasingly became America's satellite state. Thanks to these tax breaks and incentives, numerous American companies made their way to set up operations in New Zealand. Yet New Zealand, traditionally an agricultural nation, now boldly backs the entertainment sector, which is quite an achievement in itself. However, the issue lies in even after offering these incentives, the American companies refuse to maintain major production operations locally. Instead, they merely outsource minor tasks to local firms. New Zealand taxpayers are subsidizing American corporations. It's a terrible waste of resources. Moreover, it's well understood that purely outsourcing-based companies rarely develop full industry capabilities. As a result, the New Zealand government implemented various incentive policies to boost the local entertainment sector. However, this failed to create a sustainable industry hub due to the enormous cost of subsidies. Government funding gradually decreased. Major studios that had established here began pulling out. Meanwhile, local industry remained stagnant. The whole initiative ended up being futile in March 2017. At that time in New Zealand, there were just 39 gaming companies, mostly consisting of small indie studios primarily doing outsource work for Western companies, generating $64.3 million in revenue. This heavy reliance on outsourcing kept New Zealand at the bottom of the gaming industry chain. Their revenue potential was completely out of their control. As mere contractors, they had virtually no creative control or autonomy. Yet despite these industry challenges through ups and downs, but they managed to get off the ground. The next challenge is how to build on this momentum, the question of expansion. So how can they expand? It boils down to two things. First, a large market. Second, steady investment. The New Zealand gaming industry desperately requires a viable market for its products and funding for product development. Meanwhile, to make matters worse, Australia next door introduced new tax breaks for the gaming industry. This resulted in New Zealand losing its top gaming talent. What's more, these 15 companies had been operating for over 11 years on average, while newer companies struggled to establish themselves. In this climate, domestic startups faced an underdeveloped investment ecosystem, facing domestic deadlock. New Zealand had to look abroad for help. On the global stage, markets that could offer New Zealand. Few markets could provide both elements. Subsequently, New Zealand turned to China for support. As previously mentioned, New Zealand kept one foot in Western markets and the other in China's Belt and Road Initiative, playing both sides. Eventually, their gaming industry began to flourish as well, and we have to thank a well-known company, but we'll get to that later. We'll explain that in detail shortly. It's worth noting that New Zealand did approach Western companies first. When New Zealand was seeking investment, several Western companies showed interest, including major players like Netflix and Apple. However, these corporations had one particular condition. This is typical American diplomatic strategy. Sure, they let you invest, but with tons of strings attached. They want control over your company's direction. Everything must be under their thumb. Working with them, will you profit? Sure thing, but at what cost to your independence? That's questionable. Chinese companies, however, take a completely different approach. The gaming industry in New Zealand has evolved into what we see today. Chinese companies were quick to recognize this opportunity. Similar to the United States, China possesses a massive gaming market and substantial investment capital. Major Chinese tech companies, particularly Tencent, have established a presence in New Zealand. Unlike their Western counterparts, Tencent's investment requirements for indie studios are more lenient and better respects developers' creative freedom, which naturally drew New Zealand game developers significant attention. Among the studios backed by Tencent in New Zealand, one notable success story is the 2018 acquisition of Grinding Gear Games, commonly known as GGG, the creators of Path of Exile, first released in 2013. It's been running strong for 11 years. Fast forward to 2023. They surprisingly managed to hit a new peak in concurrent players, reaching 350,000 players simultaneously. Their masterpiece, Path of Exile. The game is widely regarded as the spiritual successor to Diablo 2 and stands as one of the greatest PC games ever made. before being acquired by Tencent way back in the day. Back in 2016, Grinding Gear Games began extensive talks with Tencent. Tencent had discovered this promising game from New Zealand. They were convinced that if the Diablo franchise could maintain its popularity for almost 20 years with millions of devoted fans worldwide, then this game that inherited the spirit of Diablo would definitely deserve to be introduced to the Chinese market. In March 2016, Path of Exile launched in China with Tencent handling the game's regional publishing and marketing operations. This partnership showed Grinding Gear Games Tencent's true potential. Meanwhile, Tencent started taking interest in New Zealand's gaming industry more proactively. Tencent began investing in New Zealand gaming companies. Several studios were quickly brought under Tencent's wing, including DayZ creators, Dean Hall, and Rocketworks, pioneers of the Battle Royale genre, along with Fear and Hunger developers, Digital Confectioners, creators of Tide King and Deep Sea, as well as the widely popular in China Riff Raff games, known for the Fatal Frame series. All these indie projects flourished following Tencent's investment, skyrocketed by 2018. New Zealand's gaming industry revenue reached $92.1 million. This shows that while there's plenty of talent out there, not everyone finds the right opportunity to shine. In fact, Tencent not only revitalized Grinding Gear Games, but helped it grow into world-renowned full-service game studio even as far as in America. Elon Musk, a die-hard Diablo fan, posted on Twitter expressing excitement for Path of Exile 2. Fast forward to 2023, surprisingly, New Zealand's gaming industry generated revenue of $434.4 million. The industry has now surpassed the wool industry to become a key economic sector, and that's not all. Back in 2017, the industry primarily depended on outsourcing contracts. In 2023, the New Zealand gaming industry outsourcing percentage has fallen to just 15%. Meanwhile, the local gaming sector, the workforce consists of just over 1,000 people, and their productivity reaches 10 times the national average GDP per capita, making it one of the highest paying sectors in New Zealand. With just these 1,000 people, imagine if this workforce doubled or tripled, the potential value would be absolutely immeasurable. This shows that the gaming industry in New Zealand has enormous potential. The potential is truly enormous. Currently, New Zealand has recently seen growth beyond just the gaming sector, including IT, film, and digital media industries have all shown remarkable growth. In the tech sector, the data management company Datacom generates 110 million New Zealand dollars in revenue, $60 million US. Furthermore, Datacom has developed technology to capture human motion, enabling interaction with robots in smart spaces and virtual environments through interactive wearable devices with impressive results. Surprisingly, even in the space industry, New Zealand has made its mark in recent years. In fact, a New Zealand-based private aerospace company, Rocket Lab, has grown into targeting 50 launches annually. At this point, some of you folks might be wondering, Dongmeng, didn't you start by discussing the Belt and Road Initiative and the Five Eyes Alliance? How did we end up getting here? Well, let me point out something important. Let's look at a key moment specifically in 2017. As you can see, all these previously mentioned investments were finalized after 2017. Despite some early discussions in around 2016, everything was sealed in 2017. Now, 2017 marked a significant milestone because that's when New Zealand joined the Belt and Road Initiative. Since joining the Belt and Road Initiative, unlike the US-Chinese companies, with proper authorization have invested across New Zealand's industries, making substantial investments. Take Yili Group, China's dairy giant, which acquired the second-largest dairy cooperative, becoming its largest shareholder to boost their livestock industry. Chinese firms also invested in the local wine and dairy sectors. Moving on from agriculture. Next up, infrastructure. When it comes to infrastructure, China leads the way. Chinese companies have, since 2017, been involved in over half of all infrastructure projects, including roads, bridges, and public transit systems. China Harbour Engineering Company. They have undertaken Auckland Port's expansion project. The plan aims to transform Auckland Port, elevating the majority of the port area by a minimum of 0.6 meters to enhance climate change resilience, to improve drainage infrastructure. The project aims to modernize the port facilities beyond infrastructure development following the infrastructure completion. Around the Zhongxing terminal area, they've developed extensive leisure and cultural amenities. As stated by Auckland's mayor, they plan to meet Sydney's development standards. Our goal is to develop Auckland, transforming Auckland into a world-class cultural and entertainment hub. Through these wide-ranging investments, our sole objective is clear: to create mutual benefits with New Zealand. We provide the investment. However, unlike some other investors, we won't dictate your decisions. When all parties prosper and achieve success together, everyone stands to benefit. Our partnership with New Zealand was actually an initiative we took at that time. New Zealand was facing development challenges despite your past espionage against us, or even seeing us as an adversary. But when you face hardships, China stands ready to help support your growth and progress. After you overcome these challenges, take a moment to really think about who truly poses a threat to global security. At the same time, by investing in New Zealand, we can transform it into a potential global hub for Chinese products. Lesser nations scramble for markets, developing nations select their markets, but leading nations develop and nurture markets. That's the fundamental difference. Well, as a gaming enthusiast, that's all for this episode. Join me next time. Take care, everyone.